Also, just a reminder about the Slido that you can post your questions, and that question, we will be looking at the top questions. You know, as you look at those questions, you can actually like the questions that you want the presenters to respond to. So take time to do that. We will be closing that before we go to the breakout room. Dr. Johnson, here's one question. Why is Christianity perceived as a Western religion? What must we do to change this perception?
Yes, thank you. That's a wonderful question. And I think it's the simple answer is that although I showed you that, Christians in Asia and Africa were in the majority in the very early centuries of Christianity, and that they are also in the majority today, you'll see on that same graph that most Christians were Europeans for many hundreds of years. And a lot of our theology and ecclesiology and hymns and a lot of liturgies and many things that are part of particularly the Protestant church were developed in Europe in a situation in which most people were Christians, and there was very little contact with other Christians. And most of that became the basis then for what most of us today around the world, no matter where we were from, that's what we studied. We studied that theology and that way of looking at the world. And although it's very rich and there's much to learn from it, it was not diverse, and it was limited to one set of cultures' way of looking at the world, which is highly individualistic in a world that's very much more communitarian, for example. So the reason, I think, is the dominance of European Christianity, and then through colonialism and many other things. So there's a historical reason why it is that way, but it's not the way it's meant to be. I think we all know that. And so even today, this European or North American way of looking at the world still has a lot of resources, even though it's a minority now. And so there's a continuation of those ideas being spread around the rest of the world, when really we should be listening to each other from all around the world. So yes, I think that's the reason.
Thank you very much. There are so many questions now. Another question: what are the earliest expressions of Christianity that Western Asia has preserved, and how can we be learning from them as opposed to newest trends from the West?
Yes, that's a great question too, because this is probably one of the most difficult things that we face. As global Christianity, we have the very place where Christianity began is under the most pressure. And in fact, many Christians in West Asia are asking for help, really, from the rest of Christianity. And when we encounter Christianity there, particularly in its Orthodox and Catholic forms, which go back the farthest, we see such a rich theological tradition that that's found in liturgy. It's found in the sermons that are preached in Iraq and Syria and Turkey and many other places. We see such a rich early theological perspective on Christianity. It goes all the way back, even to, well, of course, to Nicaea, which we mentioned earlier. And it's, it's the richness of that tradition is something that should not be lost. And it's very orthodox, I have to say, with a little o. For those of us in the evangelical and Protestant traditions, we're always looking for something new to try to go forward. But it's also very healthy to look back as far as we can. And here's communities that have been there for centuries, being faithful under enormous pressure. Surely there's something that we can learn from them from that very, very earliest period.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. We have very good questions in the Slido, so we'll be showing some of them. First question, what are the key factors of growth of Christianity in Asia? And maybe both of you can respond to that. You would like to start, Dr. Moon, maybe? What do you think are the key factors of growth of Christianity in Asia?
I think the factors contribute to church growth in Asia could be different depending on the countries. And there could be different factors affected the church growth in Asian countries. When it comes to Korea, for example, the indigenous principles of leading churches, so what we call three-cell principle, the Nebius principle was adopted as a good mission strategy in the early period of Christianity in Korea. So the strategy was good. And another factor might be the commitment, the sacrificial commitment of indigenous leaders, Korean leaders, was very
So, Dr. Moon, you're muted.
He got muted.
Maybe we can come back to you. Dr. Johnson, would you like to respond to the question?
okay.
Oh, it's okay now.
Oh, he's okay.
Okay.
Now. Okay.
Thank you. So there are situational factors as well. For example, the Korean alphabet system was very scientific and easy to learn. So the missionaries and the Korean leaders decided to use the Korean alphabet in translating the Bible and developing tracts and other educational materials to reach the Korean people, the ordinary people. And another situational factor might be the traditional concept of monotheism. There was a concept of God who is an absolute creator and who is a transcendental and also all-powerful. That kind of transcendental concept of God was there. So these factors, the strategy factors and leadership factors and the situational factors all contributed to the growth of churches in South Korea. I don't know much about other countries. I have not analyzed church growth in other countries, but I think when it comes to China, probably the commitment, the high-level commitment of Chinese leaders are important factors for the church growth and the passionate evangelism and their commitment not compromising with the authorities to preserve the purity of the gospel messages. So those things seems to be important to me. And in Burmese context, I think I find similar factors affecting the church growth and the evangelistic ministries, especially in the Chin state. I think the Christian tribes are very active in reaching their neighboring unreached people groups.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moon. Anything that you want to add, Dr. Johnson?
Yes, just perhaps that Dr. Moon highlighted in his presentation the importance of the suffering of the church. And I think that can be a powerful example of the transforming nature of the gospel and how it impacts people who are followers of Jesus. So I think that's also important, and I think we shouldn't overlook the tremendous care that Christians have over the centuries for the poor and marginalized, and the testimony that is of the church's vitality. So those two things would be important as well.
Indeed, thank you so much. Now let's go to the next question. How can we encourage more indigenization in Asia? Majority of the Asian church consider West has better theology than the East, though God works equally. How can we encourage more indigenization in Asia? Dr. Moon, since you're from Asia, but of course, Dr. Johnson, you're free also to respond.
Where I think the notion of contextualization or indigenization is very important in doing Christian ministries in our times. And it's hard to overemphasize the importance of contextualizing the gospel messages. And but the reality is that many Asian leaders, including theologians, are dependent on the Western theologians and the leaders because of the educational background of the Asian theologians. So that's one realistic constraint affecting the current phenomenon. But I think Asian Christians are closer to the realities of other religions. And also Asian Christians are living in a pluralistic situation, as Dr. Johnson pointed out in his presentation. So I appreciate the point very much. So from our first-hand experience of other religions and other worldviews, I think Asian theologians and leaders could work on indigenizing and contextualizing theologies in a better way. So as Paul Hebert pointed out, there is the importance of self-theologizing. The Asian theologians must emphasize self-theologizing, but that doesn't rule out the possibility of continuous learning from other theologians from other parts of the world. I think it's not one direction, it's a two-way traffic, in my understanding. So both contributing and learning, are important dynamics needed in our time. So, but basically, self-theologizing is the foundational to globalizing theologies. So.
Well, Dr. Johnson, would you like to add, or we can go to the next question? This is quite related, although this is more on being cautious in terms of contextualization. So the next question, and you can respond to both of the questions.
Okay, yes.
Sometimes Christianity in Asia can be over-contextualized and lose the essence of the gospel. For example, the Kakuri Christian history in Japan. How can we be careful?
Yeah, maybe I could just say that I think, again, Dr. Moon spoke of the two things that happen at the same time. One is contextualization and indigenization, but the other is conversation with Christians from around Asia and from around the world. And I feel that that conversation, that pilgrim principle that we all are not at home here, is actually the key to limiting syncretism. Because if we're in conversation with other Christians, then we see the ways in which we might be going too far in our contextualization. And but the contextualization is so precious at the same time to the rest of the body of Christ. And I think of my own experience in living in Thailand and Singapore, that I owe so much to Thai Christians and Singaporean Christians. I just would not be the same person without having conversed with them and seen how they live out their faith. There's so many limitations to Western faith, and the minute you get in conversation with Christians in other cultures, you begin to see those much more clearly. So I think that conversation, that globalizing theology that Dr. Moon spoke of, and the indigenous, the pilgrim principle is so important.
Yeah, very, very helpful. Thank you. Now, this is a different question. And maybe Dr. Johnson, you can respond to this based on your research. What is the demographic profile of those who are converting to Christianity in Asia? Do we have research on that?
Yes, well, the one important shift in this area of conversion would be that in the past, there perhaps has been more conversions from ethnic or tribal groups into Christianity. If we go back 100 or more years, we see quite a bit of that. And the shift today is that there have been increasing conversions from Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism to some extent as well, which again is why it's so important for us to benefit from the experience of Christians in Asia. So that's entirely new. It's not something Europeans or North Americans understand at all. And I think that, that's the future of Christianity. We're not going to simply grow by having large families, and we need to encounter the world's religions, not simply the ethnic or tribal societies. So I think that's the big shift, and there's evidence from all across Asia of that.
Yeah, we have limited time. So briefly, Dr. Moon, can you respond to this next question about the state of Christianity in North Korea?
Well, I don't have any accurate statistics based on empirical study. We only have limited information, and we are dependent on individuals who worked in North Korea. So people suggest different statistics, but I don't think people outside of North Korea cannot know the reality accurately. So we have only guesses. And for me as a researcher, I don't want to make any, ballpark figure or any, educated guess about the figures.
Okay, this is the last question. And Dr. Johnson, maybe this is something that you should respond to. It would be interesting to measure the impact of Christian faith on the societal culture in Asia. Have there been any such studies done?
Yes, I think so. I think we're beginning to see studies done at the doctoral level. And we're also seeing people publish about the impact of Christianity in different countries across the region. Of course, 50 different countries, there's a lot of ground to cover. So I think we're seeing more of this, and much of it is emerging directly from Asia. Although I think some of the presses in the Western world have picked up dissertations that were written in Asia. But yes, I think we're seeing more of that, and probably this group knows better specific people, but we're delighted to see these kind of studies coming out.
Thank you very much. We don't have time. There's still many questions, but we need to go to our worship and prayer time now. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Moon. We have learned a lot from your presentations and from this Q&A.